All right, Deuteronomy 31, let's call this one Be Strong and Courageous and subtitle it Candor. Why? Because be strong and courageous, if you have very much experience with the Bible, can be kind of cliche, but it is a famous and very valuable part of this passage where God is encouraging Israel to be strong and courageous. But there is an undercurrent of strength that probably isn't talked about as much as we need to. And so let's talk about that after we get to the first part of the chapter, which is going through God, first of all, encouraging Israel to be strong and courageous as they are going into the promised land. And as Moses is phasing out, he's going to encourage Joshua to be strong and courageous as the new leader of Israel as they are going into the land of promise. And then finally, Moses is going to write down this law and tell the priests and the elders that they need to make sure it is read to the people every 7 years, in addition to what we've already seen, where there are parts of the law that they need to have in their hearts and kept on their body, on their doorposts, and on their gates. He's saying there's a special occasion during the Feast of Booths when this needs to be read every 7 years. But after he is encouraging them to be strong and courageous, we see God step in. And there are times when we forget that encouragement is great, but God is a God of straight talk. And that's why we subtitled it Candor, because after Moses gets done, God isn't very delicate in telling him, you're about to die. You're going to die without seeing the promised land. It's a reminder of things we've seen already, but sometimes just hearing the words, it can seem kind of harsh. Moreover, when he is moving into his realization that he's not going to be able to make it in the promised land, as we've seen before, part of the strength of Moses' character is he does not seem to be the least bit bitter about the fact that he is now going to encourage Joshua into trying to help step in and lead the people much the same way as he has. But beyond that, he is not simply, meaning God is not simply going to tell Moses that he's going to die. He's going to have some straight talk for the people too. He's going to say in straight terms, you are going to whore as a people. And that is a brutal term that the Bible uses over and over again for the attitude that they're going to have toward the God who has basically delivered them out of all of their misery, and the way they're going to turn from him to try to find everybody else that they can thank for their progress. But beyond that, Moses himself, because in many ways he was a faithful representative of the things that God was telling the people, he's going to remind them as well, you're going to turn away and you're going to do wrong, and it's not going to take very long. And so all of the encouragement is followed by candor. And so the reason why this struck me today is that we're living in a time where encouragement always seems welcomed, but candor not so much. But understand, part of the call to be strong and courageous involves being able to handle candor as well as encouragement. Why? Because Moses is essentially the last of a generation that we're going to see referred to in Hebrews. And as we've already seen, chapters 3 and 4 are going to describe this generation as people who perished in the wilderness, and that's it. But by the time we get to chapter 11, we're going to see Moses mentioned, and accordingly, both Gospels and the book of Hebrews seem to set Moses up as exemplary in comparison to the rest of the generation that was simply, as we've talked about before, used as an example. The key distinction being that generation never proved itself consistently able to function outside of its happy place, meaning they weren't able to really operate when God wasn't being so encouraging. Whereas Moses, even when God was going to kill him for not having his kids circumcised, even after God told him he was not going to get to see the promised land after striking the rock, was still diligent in doing the things that God was asking him to do, whether or not God was being encouraging and whether or not Moses was in his happy place. And likewise, spirituality aside, societies, organizations, families, etc., tend to depend on people who are dependable, whether or not circumstances are favorable, which is why we often say it's best to us as we go forward in him, God willing, allowing him to make us strong and courageous enough, not just to take encouragement, but to take candor, especially when it's stated directly, but in love.